Time's River, Chapter 12, Journey's End, April. I awoke. I was lying in a soft, warm bed. Light streamed in through a nearby window. My first thought was that this was a strange place I had never seen before, and then the confusion of sleep slowly cleared from my brain, and I recognized my surroundings, my room in the basement of the new house. Well, I say new, but we had moved here in 1986. I had moved away in 1990, seeking fame or fortune, or preferably both, in the Golden West. Failing to find it, I had made my way back here in the fall of 1998. My folks had converted the basement to an in-law apartment while I was out west, and so had welcomed me back, at least until I could get on my feet. I had been having such a strange dream. To wake up like that, disoriented and not recognizing my own room, it reminded me of the dreams I had endured in the months after I dropped out of college. I had spent years hopping from job to job, always plagued by a confusing mental landscape where it had become difficult to tell my dreams from the waking world. In those days, I had tried to find a way to shut off the cacophony of conflicting thoughts, and to some degree at least, found success in the bottom of a bottle. At least, when I would drink until I blacked out, there were no dreams. When I awoke, curled up by the toilet on the cold floor of the bathroom with the taste of puke in my mouth, I had no doubt about where or who I was. Granted, I wasn't any of the things I wanted to be, but it wasn't confusion, and that was at least something. I had come back to Newfield and found a second shift job doing manual labor. It wasn't exactly mentally challenging, but perhaps that wasn't a bad thing. It kept me busy, and when I would come home after midnight, I was too tired to go out looking for trouble. The pay was more than enough to take care of my needs, since all the folks had asked for was for me to kick in with the utilities. I didn't drink anymore. It seemed I had developed an allergic reaction to alcohol. I had never heard of such a thing, but it's probably safe to say it saved my life. Anything more than a single beer with a pizza, and I would be doubled over in agony. For a while I was still out west, I tried drinking grain alcohol, thinking if I could get completely plastered fast enough, perhaps my body wouldn't have time to hurt. It didn't work, and when I spent 3 days bedbound with a bucket as my sole companion, I concluded I would have to call the whole thing off. I'd gone digging through old boxes of knickknacks, looking for a box cutter I could use to slit my wrists. Instead, I had found an old wood carving I had made years ago. I couldn't even remember why I had kept it. It was crude and ugly. It was supposed to be a sword, but it was a blocky thing that looked like something some kids might use to play pirates in an old 1950s comic strip. It had a message carved into it, but even that looked like it had been jabbed into it with a screwdriver. Looking at it made me feel sick and ashamed, but at the same time anxious and expectant, like I was waiting for something. The message was what had frozen me in place. Lost eyes, find lies. Free roam, find home. I had indeed lost myself, and trying to find me again, had followed all sorts of irrational thoughts. I had explored witchcraft, drug use, shamanism, and dozens of other bogus fads, looking for something which could tell me what I was supposed to be, something to give my life meaning. They'd all turned out to be lies. The world was full of lost, bleating sheep, all looking for a shepherd. I had free roamed all right. I had roamed all over the country during those years, and at this moment, as I scrabbled in this cardboard box looking for something I could use to end it once and for all, this silly voice from my childhood spoke to me, telling me to find home. Was that what I had been running from all this time? Could it be that simple? I had put the little sword on the table and picked up the phone. I had called my mother and told her bluntly, "Mom, I need to come home." There had been no questions, no demands, no accusations or recriminations. She had simply said, "Then come home, Winston. We're always here for you. You can move into the basement apartment." And so I had. The lost and wandering days of free roaming were behind me now, and in the 9 months since I had come back east, I hadn't had a single drink. I was smoking clove cigarettes, but only ever in the car, and only a single cigarette a day. I seemed to be getting my life back on some sort of track. There were people around who loved me, who didn't expect anything from me. The people around me weren't constantly scheming to figure out a way to rob me, swindle me, use me, or abuse me. I was home, at last. Funny how sometimes you can't understand a thing until you lose it. The folks hadn't made any demands on me with regards to going to church either. They were the pastors of a little storefront chapel. They weren't in it for the money, as none of the people who went to the place had any. They just wanted to help. But they didn't insist that I attend or anything. They did make sure I knew that I was welcome, and that was it. I had abandoned the kind of faith they offered long ago. I couldn't remember the reasons why now, but I had. It was what had inspired all the dead-end wandering in the search for meaning. For a time, I had even prided myself on being able to tear Christians' arguments apart in conversation. But of course, all that had proven to be empty and hollow, worthless. Was it possible that there was something I had overlooked there as well? My parents were happy, and their concern for others was genuine. All my explanations for why Christianity was stupid sounded tinny in my own ears when I actually compared their end results to mine. I was still wary of getting wrapped up into something. This basement apartment had been a lifeline. To go to their church and end up starting some fight or controversy could threaten that lifeline. It would be like crapping in your own nest. So I figured I'd try getting involved in a non-committal way. I'd go to one of their social functions. They had a church picnic coming up. I decided to go to that. And it was mighty fortunate I did, too, because that's where I met the girl of my dreams. I know people use and abuse language and cliché, but I'm telling you that when I first heard her speak, I felt a shockwave that trembled through every corner of my being, a shock which shouted, "This is the one!" Now, most guys will tell you how the woman they're with caught their eye. And I did find this girl, this woman, very attractive. But it was when she first spoke that I knew I wanted to be with her forever, though we hadn't so much as had a cup of coffee together. Her voice resonated with me. We talked. I introduced myself. She smiled and simply said, "Hi, I'm April," and then moved along to continue meeting and greeting people who were arriving. I found like there was an echo when she spoke those words, like her voice was being picked up by some hidden sound system that had suddenly developed a feedback loop. I had to find a way to be with her. So I started going to other church functions as well. But she didn't really notice me, I think, until the day at the bike path. Prior to that, at these functions, I had been complimentary and attentive, of course, but April didn't appear to be looking to try to hook up with anybody. She was just enjoying the fellowship of the other Christians and trying to have a nice time. When I heard, though, that the group was going to do an outing at the bike trail, I resolved to make a much more obvious effort to get her attention. The bike trail to which they were going had been an old disused rail line, some 10 miles or so of which had been converted into a biking/walking trail near to a college campus in the area. The trail had an old bridge which crossed the river in a grand scenic view far to the north of Newfield, and a host of small shops had sprung up to take advantage of the traffic. Among these were an organic food store, an ice cream stand, a seafood shack, things like that. The group piled into 2 vans, loaded down with bikes, and made its way to the parking area at one end of the trail. My brother Eddie was goofing off with his kids, and I joined in, trying to pull stunts and garner the attention due to a crazy uncle. I had decided that I had nothing to lose by trying to get April's attention and everything to gain. So I didn't worry about being confident. I just focused on enjoying the day. I figured if she saw that I was someone with whom she could have fun, she might open up. She spent most of her time, at least at first, trailing along at the rear of the group, keeping pace with Eddie's wife and having girl talk, I suppose. I decided to show off a little. At various points along the trail, there were little turnouts, picnic spots mostly. These usually had spurs leading off the main trail, and as we moved farther away from the river, the turnouts led to clearings which were higher and higher above the trail as we went along. From these, you could rocket down the spur path, flash by people on the main path, and then quickly disappear into the next exit, using your speed to climb into the next position. I began to do this, waiting until April was on the section of trail below, and then dive bomb her, calling out some joke or witticism, before disappearing in a flash up the next ramp. It seemed to be going well, as April was laughing and enjoying the attention, calling out responses to me as I sped off into the trees. That was until I climbed up into a picnic area that was occupied. All of the others had not been. The days of families going to public parks and actually bringing picnic supplies, and even sandwiches, much less charcoal briquettes and a cooler, seemed to be passing from the world, though it had been common enough in my youth. Perhaps the convenience of the shops which had sprung up along the trail contributed to this. Whatever the reason, each of the little spots, most with picnic tables, were empty. But as I crested the hill of this one, I encountered a little group of people, a man and two women. All of them seemed strangely familiar. I couldn't immediately recall where I might have seen the first two, but the third bore a startling resemblance to April, though perhaps slightly younger. This by itself wouldn't have been so shocking. The world is full of people, and there are only so many permutations of features. No. What was peculiar, what shocked me almost enough to cause me to tumble off my bicycle, was the fact that the woman who looked like April was wearing a chrome-studded black leather gag, a wide strap which was buckled tightly around her head, covering her mouth. There was a chrome, or perhaps stainless steel, ring looped through the material of this device, and to this was fashioned a chain leash, the other end of which was being held by the man. The man himself was sitting atop the picnic table in this spot, with his boots up on the bench. He was very curiously attired, looking like a cross between a jockey and a golfer, with oversized billowing pants of red and white plaid, which looked like they might have been made of the tablecloth from an Italian restaurant, and a tight-fitting garnet-colored V-neck shirt. His boots were leather of the same garnet hue. He had fox-like features and a fox-colored beard to match, copper with threads of white salted into its pointed tip. The other woman was clad in a tight, bright red leather unitard, with long burgundy hair and pale skin which peeked out of her outfit here and there. She was sitting on the bench next to the man's boot. Her own boots were thigh-high models which matched her outfit. Between them, the two looked like a couple of S&M weirdos. And while my philosophy largely fell in the vicinity of letting people do whatever floated their respective boats, so long as they did it away from me, these two were gawking at me with mischievous grins splashed across their faces. These expressions, combined with the distinct feeling that I knew them from somewhere, made me very nervous. My first instinct was to jump forward and ride down the second ramp, which led away from this place to rejoin the rail trail going the other direction. But the expression of the second woman, the April double, held me back. There's an expression I had picked up out west. It had originated with horsefolk, and had come to stand for anything which had been shabbily treated and abused, ridden hard and put away wet. Perhaps it was the leather gag which summoned this phrase into my mind as I looked at the woman. Her long blonde hair was tangled and unkempt, full of snarls. Her outfit looked to have been a country-style dress, something you might find a farmer's wife wearing. Simple and modest, with a herringbone pattern of robin's egg blue and white. Or at least, it was once that color. It looked as though she had been made to crawl across 1,000 miles of desert on her hands and knees. The cloth was sun-bleached and smeared with dirt and tattered all over. The soft flesh of her thighs had ugly welts across it, where she had been lashed with something, probably a bullwhip. Her fingertips were cracked and bloody from hundreds of tiny cuts and scrapes. Her hands were not bound, only clasped together in front of her chest. Her face was pointed toward the ground. I could not see her eyes. The sight of her made me want to cry and rage with anger at the same time. I couldn't leave her with these freaks. The man was watching me intently. "See something you like, Winston?" I looked at him, and the revulsion I felt for him grew huge and palpable. I felt physically ill. "I don't think he remembers us, Snookums," purred the redhead. "I'd say I feel slighted, but I really just don't care for him anymore. I think you should just—" The man reached down with the hand that wasn't holding the leash and put a finger across her lips. "Shh," he whispered. "I know. Let old Stan take care of it." He turned back and looked at me. "It is a pity you've forgotten so much, but I've been waiting for this day for a very long time, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to jog your memory." Stan? That reminded me of all those dreams I used to have as a kid. Nightmares where I felt like my head was going to burst. A time that had seemed to go on forever, which had planted the seeds that had led to my drinking. Dreams of other lives, other versions of myself, stalking myself. False memories of pain and disfigurement, misery and violence, suffering and loss. And through them all there was a single thread, a single copper thread, and Stan was its name. My vision doubled, and I suddenly felt an immense wave of thoughts and memories, things I had thought had finally been put to rest. I felt like the pharaoh, Ramses, in Cecil B. DeMille's epic, as the waters of the Red Sea closed in and drowned his army. Old Cecil had got it wrong, of course. He couldn't resist giving old Yule the scene with the dramatic return to his wife in Egypt, crushed by utter defeat. But I knew better. I was drowning. "Ah, there it is. Much better. You know, ever since you defaulted on our contract, I've been waiting for you to recover. Granted, technically I could have claimed my prize at any time, but I don't just get your soul, Winston. I get everything. All your assets. Soul, body, mind, life." He paused. "Girl." I floundered, trying to assemble the flotsam in my head into some sensible construct, trying to make any sense of what I was seeing and remembering. A jumble of images, spanning more years than I had been alive. I began to topple over sideways as vertigo overwhelmed me. The man's hand, Stan's hand, shot out and prevented me from falling. "Hey now, don't go damaging the merchandise. That's mine now, after all," he said with a smile. A foul reek slid out of that smile and slapped me in the face, an oily aroma of decay, like he had been chewing week-old roadkill. Adding that to the barrel rolls my stomach was already doing was too much. I vomited the French fries I had wolfed at the seafood shack not an hour before, and the spray was bright red with the ketchup I had smothered them in. What are you talking about?" I struggled, wiping the string of ketchup-hued drool from my lower lip. "Our contract! Come now, I'm willing to give you a minute to catch up, but I'll have no dawdling. I've been waiting too long already. Frankly, the only reason I've waited this long is because you really didn't have anything worth taking. You've been quite a wreck ever since you got back to your present," Stan chided. "And I wanted for you to get back on your feet, to have something good enough to be worth my trouble, so that you'd know it was me who took it from you. To be honest, I was certain you were finished. I was prepared to write you off and just take what was left at fire sale prices. And then, out of nowhere, you managed to get back on your feet and find your way home. And now, to top it off, after all this time, you finally find her. Kudos to you, old chum. I really don't know how you managed it. I mean, I've watched every single move, and I never saw a thing. Copperfield's got nothing on you, kid. She's down there," he said, pointing down the ramp toward the rail trail, "and after I take what's mine, I'm going to step into your shoes. Then I'm going to hop on this little bike and zip on down there and see what all the fuss is about." "I'm not giving you anything," I protested weakly. "Rubbish! Poppycock! Balderdash!" Stan shouted in gay, mocking tones. "A deal's a deal, Winston, and you broke ours. Oh, I'm sure you thought I would forget, just because old Kenny punched his ticket, but I never let go once I've got a contract, Winnie. All you had to do was deliver 7 measly words, and you failed. With all your meddling, there's no way you can deliver the message now. Kenny is dead, and never promised old Mazzy his revenge. So even if you located Mazzy now, saying the words wouldn't be a completed delivery because there is no longer any message to send. The contract is broken. You have defaulted, and now the entirety of your assets belong to me. Everything you have, everything you are, everything you have ever been, and everything you could ever be. I own you, Winston Raleigh." The contract. I remembered now. A contract to say something to someone. A preacher? How could I have ever agreed to such a thing? How could I have not anticipated betrayal from such an obvious monster? My stomach convulsed, and I tried to vomit again, but there was nothing left to throw but bitter pink bile. "Since you failed to deliver those words, Winston, I now take great pleasure in delivering them to you instead. Personally," he said with a flourish. He cleared his throat and spoke in a loud, clear voice. "I am coming for what is mine," he intoned. "And now I have come. Gimme." The redhead applauded. Lily. Her name was Lily. Stan gave her a little stage bow. My mind raced. I remembered trying to be clever. I don't know how I could have ever been so arrogant and foolish as to think I had a chance to outsmart this hideous creature, but I had. I hadn't trusted him, not entirely. I had said something, and he had added something onto the contract in response. What was it? Stan let go of the arm he had clutched to prevent me from falling, and instead grabbed me by the throat. He began to squeeze, but he wasn't suffocating me. Instead, I felt his fingers digging into my neck. "Misrepresented yourself," I gasped. Stan withdrew his hand, and I crumpled to the ground, falling to my hands and knees. My right hand slid through the mess of my partially digested French fries. "What did you say?" he roared. I choked and coughed. The places where each of his fingers had dug in burned as though I had been branded with a hot iron, and the acid from my stomach was burning my throat. "You misrepresented your intentions to me." "How dare you?" he bellowed. "I introduced myself to you as Satan. How much more direct can I be? It's not my fault that your rebellion against your parents blinded you to the truth of what that means." That's not what I meant," I said, still coughing. The memories of the past were still jumbled, but I had a strong mental image. This man Mazzy, or Mazzella, standing defiantly somewhere, protecting someone I couldn't see from a maniac with a knife. The man being cut down, his throat slashed. I got to my feet and wiped my puke-covered hand on my shorts. "You acted like you wanted to punish bad people, but Mazzella was not a bad person. He was a good man. I only thought he was a bad man because..." "Because?" Stan demanded impatiently. "Because I wanted to believe the worst about him. You took advantage of that and convinced me you were doing God's work of punishing sinners." Duh, kid. I'm the father of lies. That's kind of what I do. You heard that 1,000 times in church. You can't claim ignorance on this one." "That doesn't matter," I said confidently. Stan paused, leaning forward until his hideous leer was only inches from my face. The stench washed over me again, but my stomach was too weary for the moment to clench again and just shuddered. "What?" he said softly. It doesn't matter whether you think my claim as an aggrieved party is valid or not. You agreed, I stammered, as I tried to recall the precise wording of his amendment. I tried to picture it. I had stared at a copy of it he had given me for many hours when I doubted whether I had made the right choice. There was one other document, too, but for the moment the contract was the most important. I thumped my temples with my fists in frustration, trying to focus. You agreed that all claims of injured status as an aggrieved party by the human were to be accepted unchallenged and without contest, I finished. The image in my head became clear at last. You explicitly agreed, in the event of any such claims, to submit to the judgment of the Supreme Court of Heaven. Stan let out an exasperated, hissing sigh. Lily was more vocal. Son of a bitch! I told you, you shouldn't, she began, turning on him. Stan slapped her across the face. She tumbled off the picnic table into my bicycle, landing in a heap on top of it. Never raise your voice to me, he howled at her. She lay motionless, not unconscious or dead, but frozen in terror and submission. The second woman, in the gag leash, turned her head for only a moment and looked up to see this. I caught a brief glimpse of blue eyes before she resumed her previous pose. Her eyes were bright, but infinitely sad. She looked every whit the image of April, but that didn't make sense. I felt I should know her. As for you, he growled, turning back to me, you haven't got a leg to stand on, and you know it. But a deal is a deal. We shall both submit to that judgment. He straightened and appeared to calm himself. It's only a minor inconvenience, after all. You were warned by many people that I can't be trusted. Your choices are indefensible. Very well, he said, taking a small, flat, dark rectangular device from a front pocket in his bistro tablecloth pants, and seemed to drag his fingers over the surface of it for a moment. It had a silver logo on the back of it, but I couldn't quite tell what it was from this angle. Small lights and sounds emanated from it, and suddenly the four of us were standing in what appeared to be an incredibly vast stone hall. Sunlight streamed in through massive windows that stretched away to cyclopean heights. The roof could not be seen, but where I expected to see one, white cumulonimbus clouds drifted from one end of the hall to the other. A lone trumpet blared. Welcome to the Supreme Court of Heaven, Winnie, he said sarcastically. Enjoy your reprieve while you can. As the trumpet blare faded, an enormous golden throne appeared before me. It towered up into the clouds. On it sat an equally gargantuan figure, which had the semblance of a man, in that it had arms, legs, and a torso. The head could not be seen, as it too stretched up into the unseen mists of the swirling clouds, though it was hinted at by the end of a massive white beard which lay on the chest of the figure, looking for all the world as large as the treetops of a small forest dusted with winter's first snow. The figure was swathed in a white robe and wore leather sandals on its feet. Winston Raleigh, you are here to receive my judgment in the matter of a breach of contract. For many years I protected you from him, but against the advice of your church, your father and your mother, and all the writings of my chosen messengers, you elected to rebel and enter into this contract, knowing full well what you would forfeit if you failed to uphold your portion. You claim misrepresentation. What have you to say to support your claim? A mighty voice boomed from above, out of the dark thunderheads which now gathered above the figure. As it spoke, lightning forked out of the lowering mists in sporadic bursts. This was all supposed to terrify me, I had no doubt. Someone had gone to some effort to conjure up images which were supposed to frighten me. to cow me into acceptance of whatever ruling this charade was going to issue. But I had stopped believing in a God that looked like this ages ago. This was cartoony, over the top. I mean, sandals? Seriously? Sandals? A piece of memory, whirling through the soup of my confused mind, snapped into place, and I realized something else. To top it off, this artifice seemed to be a bit misinformed. It had been me which had protected my younger self, hadn't it? I seemed to remember watching Stan lurking in some trees, watching a younger version of myself swinging on a playground. The image was unconnected, but it was enough to tell me that God here was a total sham. Realizing this, a second thought occurred to me. Despite the fact that this was, like, a child's impression of what a big, scary boogeyman God might look like, Stan thought I would believe it. I looked at him briefly, and he was beaming with confidence. He thought I was buying it. I quickly turned my face back to the figure on the outrageous throne to avoid tipping him off. Was there any way I could use this momentary slip to my advantage? It was true, I had struggled for a long time with the possibility of the existence of an intelligent designer in the universe, and I had come to the conclusion that there simply had to be one. Everything was just too complex, too ornate, too interconnected for me to accept that there was nothing behind it all. In my experience, things left to themselves in this universe didn't become progressively more refined, more precise, more complex and organized. Things left to their own devices went haywire. Things rot. Things go to seed. Things spiral out of control. My own life seemed to be the pictorial illustration of this very point. There was something out there. I believed that with all my heart. That didn't mean that I agreed that any men had necessarily stumbled upon the truth of what that something consisted of. Most people who tried to make such a claim seemed only interested in finding a way to parlay that supposed knowledge into wealth, power, and control for themselves. Some used their faith as a shillelagh, a cudgel with which to beat their fellow man down, to give them a sense of superiority. Others used it as a blade, with a holy directive to slay all who opposed them. I had decided long ago that if the real God was anything like any of these representations that men had made, I wanted no part of it. And yet, the words which had been spoken into my squishy little brain as a boy were still in there, doing their work. And in this moment of utter confusion and doubt, I still found myself talking in my mind to the God that I believed in. A God who could do anything if he wanted to. He might not, but it never hurt to ask. God, if you're listening, I sure could use some help right about now, I thought. And suddenly, whether by the scientifically understood process of associative memory or in answer to supplication, a scripture suddenly popped into my head. I think it was from Romans, though it had been a long time since I had concerned myself with trying to memorize any of that book. For we are saved by hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for? I turned and looked straight into the eyes of the woman in the tattered blue dress, and met her bright, fierce blue eyes looking boldly back at me. And suddenly I remembered. At last, I remembered everything. All of this happened in my head in a fraction of a second, as thoughts and feelings. Only now am I able to spell it out and really analyze it. At the time, though, I was feeling enormous pressure to say something, anything, to keep the charade going long enough to figure out how to use the knowledge that it was a charade to my benefit. One thing I knew. Stan was a narcissist. Such a one could always be relied upon to spend time when the subject was their own precious self. I was thinking of a second document I had received from Stan, after I had delivered his message, and I brought it to his remembrance now. When I had originally delivered the message, in fulfillment of our contract, and prior to subsequent events which negated that action, Stan sent me a poinsettia plant, with a note of congratulations. It was sent along with the copy of our contract I had asked for, which arrived just before Christmas. Thinking about it now, I am reminded of the first time I met Stan. He was quite charming, and I was put off my guard. He even allowed me to see some things in the mirror of his barber's chair, but he didn't want me to touch the mirror of the chair. I never stopped to wonder why until now. "This is a lovely stroll down memory lane, but is there a point?" Stan asked, with only a hint of impatience. "You don't create, Stan. You said so then, and I believed you. You said that only God could do that, God and me. You said you were only able to reconstitute things. You even showed me, and I believed you. Even after all that has happened, I still believe you, Stan. Someone once told me the best liars pepper their lies with plenty of truth, and I believe you were telling the truth. So, if you can't create, where did you get that chair from, Stan?" I asked him. He appeared uninterested in the question, but I didn't believe that he was. Not at all. "What happened to my first machine, Stan? You know, that thing that I created? When I had occasion to try to go back to where I had left it, it was gone. I tried to find it in my mind twice, and both times my mind landed me in front of your clearing. I just want to know, was that where you brought it before reconstituting it?" Stan's eyes blazed with anger. "I don't have to stand here and endure these aspersions. Lily, kill him. Don't mess the face up too much, though. I'll want it later." "With pleasure," Lily cooed. And with that, she began to change. Her eyes became yellow, slitted things. The pale skin, which had been exposed from beneath her leather onesie, now seemed to blend and merge with the leather until no paleness remained, and she seemed not so much to be clothed in leather as made of it. Her fingernails elongated into long, curved ebony claws. Behind her unfolded vast black leathery wings, and below uncoiled a long, slender, whip-like tail. "You know," I called out, backing up as Lily advanced toward me, "that's another thing. I mean, Lily here is obviously not human. I knew that already, since she hadn't aged a day in over 15 years. But she's not really a demon either, is she?" I looked at her directly, and she snarled at me. "What are you exactly?" She smiled, revealing two perfectly paired rows of very long, sharp white teeth. "Come here, and I'll show you," she hissed. She twitched her hips to one side, and her tail came whipping toward me. I had been expecting that, though. Since seeing the welts on the legs of the other woman, it was clear that this tail had been what had made them. I grabbed the tail with both hands and focused my will. Lily screamed. From the place where I held it, and spreading outward, the skin was becoming metallic, a mirrored chrome surface. "I see now why you didn't want me to touch the mirror." "It was because, as the creator of a thing, I can reclaim it, isn't it, Stan?" The chrome was spreading. Lily's entire tail and part of her right leg were now reflective metal. She tried to pull away from me, limping fiercely with the leg which was still flesh, but I held fast. "My first creation was born of hate and pain, but I don't need that anymore. I see better now," I continued. The effect had completely converted one leg and was spreading down the other and up her right side into one arm. "What has been made can be unmade," I said, and looked directly into Lily's terrified face. "I'm sorry for what he made you into. I'm sorry that I left you behind in the first place for him to find and twist. You should never have been, but I will correct that now." I lifted my right hand and brushed her cheek with it. Her face crystallized, frozen in a look of abject terror. The rest of the body immediately followed. I closed a door in my head, withdrawing, from the shell that remained, the creative force which had spawned it in the beginning, and watched as it faded slowly from existence, and my hands closed on empty space. Stan sighed. "What a waste of a fine piece of ass," he said, shaking his head. "I take it you didn't buy this whole scene then, huh?" "Pity. I thought you would. It would have made it much easier for you to simply acquiesce to powers beyond your control," he said, tapping the front of the little rectangle as he produced it again. The scene reverted, and we were still standing in the picnic area. "But it changes nothing. You can't unmake me, Winston." "No, I suppose I can't. But you can," I replied. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" he retorted mockingly. "I said poinsettias made me think of the first time I met you. But it wasn't at the barber shop," I told him. "No?" "No," I said flatly. "You see, somewhere between rewriting the timeline and now, I spent time learning many things. Among them, I learned that the toxicity of those plants is essentially a myth. Just like the persecution of Christians by putting an X in their holiday. X is the Greek letter chi, the initial letter in the Greek word Christos. And here's the kicker. Christos means Christ. X has been an acceptable representation of the word Christ for hundreds of years. Things which the real Satan would, of course, know, being older than any of our world's languages. No, chronologically, the first day I met you was the day Stan was created. The day I found this," I said, pulling my necklace out of my shirt. On a leather thong, which was looped through a small hole I had drilled in it, was the little wooden sword. Since the day it had saved my life by inspiring me to call home instead of killing myself, I had worn it as a reminder to keep me from ever finding that bottom again. I carved this from a plank I pulled from your shack the day you reinvented yourself, reconstituted yourself into this grinning representation of your idea of Satan, the day you chose to play this role. Winston. "That's not my name!" he shrieked petulantly. "My name is Stan! My name is Stan, and I'm going to win! You can't stop me! I am Winston!" He howled, his face blackening with rage. "I can't stop you, but she can," I said. With one swift jerk, I snapped the sword free of its thong and hurled it to the bound woman. She caught it deftly, with both hands outstretched, revealing a keyhole in her chest, just to the right of her breastbone. She slid the sword in, to the hilt, and the gag leash around her head split up the middle and fell away. "I'm sorry I forgot you," I told Hope. "There is nothing to forgive. You were lost. Now you are found once more, and I am glad. But we have no time for pleasantries," she replied, as smoothly and efficiently as ever. "You are correct, as always," I told her, not without a little pride. "Would you kindly undo the modifications Beta has made to you?" "I thought you'd never ask," she breathed with a grateful sigh, and in a flash reverted to the ship I had known and loved. "Aw, I wasn't done with that," Beta moaned childishly, the blackness draining out of his face. Yes, you are. Hope, I need you to perform a spatial inversion of yourself, relocating on Beta's position as your new central axis." There was an eye-bending vision of three-dimensional space being turned inside out around her, and a soft pop as some additional air was displaced, and she appeared in her new form. The disk of the floor had been replaced by a ring, above which towered an almost circular couch of red leather that faced outward, with armrests spaced 60 degrees apart, festooned with controls. Inside this circle, cradled in the ring below, was a solid-looking blue bubble. And in the bubble stood Beta, still wearing his Stan disguise. "Oh, and change the couch. I suddenly don't feel so hot about red leather anymore. A nice blue cloth should be fine," I said, and the couch rippled, becoming a plush royal blue velour. "The sword is from a plank which he formed using his ability. I believe you'll find it in the storage panel in the console now, wherever that got relocated to. But I'm keeping the time screwdriver, I said. You're such a nerd, she quipped, laughing. I ignored that for the playful banter it was meant to be. I was going to miss it. I believe you'll find his ability predates his journey through the door to pursue me. My modifications to the sword have rendered it inert. He will not be able to use it to usurp control over you, but you should be able to use it to travel further back now. My wish is that you find a way to undo what has happened to him, to give him a chance to find his own hope. I am unsure if this is possible, but I need you to try. If you succeed and you are able to return to me, then do so. But if not, you must not let him hurt anyone else, I instructed her, for what I feared might be the last time. I understand. What about you? She asked me. Her voice quivered ever so slightly. My brave girl. I'm going to marry April, if she'll have me, I answered. Good, she said, and then paused. Remember me, Winston, Hope softly sighed. The second half of the scrap of scripture that had popped into my head occurred to me, and I spoke it aloud. But if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. I had a sensation in my mind, one I had felt before, a warm smile and a warm embrace, hugging me tightly, almost viciously so. And then she was gone, sped away on her errand. I stood there for a while, I don't know how long, when another verse, this one from the psalmist, popped into my mind, and I found a measure of comfort, speaking it aloud as I did, from my own perspective. And now, Lord, what wait I for? My hope is in Thee. I turned to grab the bicycle, and there was a man standing there, eyes glittering with tears. He was clutching a walking stick, as though he feared he might need to brain me with it. He was seriously overweight and drenched with sweat from the obvious effort it had taken to climb the hill to this little picnic spot. He was wearing a name tag sticker that had "Hello, my name is" pre-printed on it, and "Mitch" had been scrawled on this in the lines that only a bold Sharpie marker can make. He was likely a part of some tour group, hence the name tag. "That was unbelievable," he gawped. "Well then, Mitch," I said, grabbing the handlebars and swinging a leg over the bike. "Since you saw it all the same, perhaps it's time to ask yourself an important question." "What question is that?" he asked nervously, pulling his stick even closer to his chest. "What do you believe?" I told him, and rode the bike down the steep ramp, back to the rail trail, to find April. I did make my way to the riverbank when the church's vans got back to town. I went to the clearing where Stan, or Beta, or whatever we want to call him, had set up shop. The barber shop was gone. In its place, there was only a chaotic pile of driftwood and scattered broken beer bottles. Satisfied that all was done at last, I turned to go when there was a rubbing sensation at my left ankle. I looked down and saw a large, old, black and white cat. He had no collar and looked up at me with what seemed to be hungry eyes. He let out a loud "wow" in greeting, and I recognized his rusty voice. "Momo!" I cried, and scooped him up. He began purring furiously. The orange coat had been a thematic fiction of Stan's, but with him gone, both the barber shop and the cat had reverted to their natural states. Yet he was plump, well-fed. It seemed that, left stranded on this river as a boy, even a boy with a 500-year-old mind, Beta had found at least one friend and had cared for him well. I hoped this was an indicator that there might yet be a hope for him, too, somewhere, somehow. Momo came home and lived with me until his time came to an end. I was unable to open doors in reality after that. I tried once, sometime later, just to see, but there had been nothing. I supposed hope had taken the ability with her. It was just as well. It was most needed where it was bestowed, for she would have a great challenge ahead of her, and I didn't need it. I was home. It is said that among faith and hope and love, the greatest of these is love. But I learned that the other thing they say is even truer. A man without hope is a man most miserable, because without hope, you'll never find the faith you need to keep you alive until love arrives. February 14th, 2001. Newfield Ledger. Wedding announcements. April Hope Emerson, daughter of Ingrid Latimer of Hartford, Connecticut, was married to Winston James Raleigh, Jr., son of Mr. and Mrs. Winston Raleigh of Newfield, at the Justice of the Peace on February 4th. Justice Thomas Abernathy officiated. Turning then, and to my surprise, looked I straight into Dragon's eyes, baleful, jaundiced yellow and baking heat. The beast was clad from head to tail in flawless iron ruby scale, and clearly meant to make of me a treat. When from the sky Seraph did smite, and heaving blade with all her might, and clove its head in twain with one attack. But in the creature's dying throes, its talons did 'pon wings enclose, and sheared the angel's glory from her back. Defenestrated, she then swooned, and though I bound the beauty's wound, I feared it not quite certain she would mend. Grounded now to the sullen earth, and doomed like men of mortal birth, to ride the river's current to its end. I would not leave her there, stranded, and so former plans disbanded, for 'twas no less than she'd have done for me. So there I camped and built a boat, such as could keep us both afloat, and swore to guide her safely to the sea. Jimmy Ray Lee, January 27th, 2016.